I'm interested that you chose a self-help kind of trope here with the book. The Rules for Life takes us back to Samuel Smiles and Victorian sort of self-help manuals in some senses, in a tradition. But you're someone who doesn't like to be told what to do, and you think a lot of modernity is kind of telling, a bit finger wagging or telling people what to do. So why would you accept your rules? Would you accept Jordan Peterson's rules if you weren't Jordan Peterson?
Oh, good point. Yeah, well, you might also ask, in some sense, how I can get away with that. Because, for example, last year I did a series of lectures on the Bible, on Genesis. And it's very easy to make that sort of thing into a finger-wagging morality. But I'm not including myself in the list of people who need improvement. I'm not talking from a pinnacle downwards to my audience. I'm stating a fairly blunt fact, which is that we have plenty of tragedy and malevolence to contend with in the confines of our life, and we need to figure out how to deal with that properly without becoming bitter and cruel and resentful. And these rules are guidelines to help people avoid those pitfalls rather than finger-wagging moral injunctions designed to make them feel guilty. And so that's why the lectures are attractive, because that kind of top-down morality is actually absent from them.
I mean, one view of this large popularity that you're enjoying at the moment, the moment, if you like, the Jordan Peterson moment, is that you've captured a kind of space between what many people think and what they're being told to think. Does that ring a bell with you? And do you think that's a fair description? Is that something you're kind of aiming to do?
Well, I think that people have a sense that the manner in which our public discourse is being conducted has tremendous danger. And the danger is essentially the elevation of the collective over the individual, and that poses a danger both on the left and on the right. And I think that by appealing to the notion of individual sovereignty, which I would say is the primary, it's the meta message behind all of the things that I've been writing about, that people find that to be a great relief. Even though what I'm asking them to do is to bear more responsibility for what they do than they might typically be inclined to. And so, but I'm facing some of the issues that people confront in their lives very squarely. I believe the fundamental religious truth of the idea that life is suffering. It's suffering because we're mortal and fragile, and because we're also subject to malevolence at our own hands and at the hands of others. It's a constant existential problem. And that can make you bitter and can make you hopeless and nihilistic and depressed and anxious and likely to abuse substances of various sorts as a medication or an escape. It can augur you in a very large number of ways. And I'm suggesting to people that there is a way out of that. And the way out is to confront that forthrightly and to adopt responsibility in your own life and to try to make the world a better place, and that it's necessary to do that. And that if you don't do that, that things go badly. And it's a relief to people to hear that, because they know it. They already know it.
So get a grip on yourself.
Well, it's more find something in your life that's so worthwhile doing that the fact that you're going to suffer is justifiable.
But if that something of value were, for instance, for someone to decide that they are a radical feminist or a radical trans campaigner, that would be something of great value in their lives. But these are not positions that I think you think have been hugely helpful.
It's generally not of great value in their life, because what they're doing is abdicating their personal responsibility to live by their own truth, let's say, to adherence to an ideology. And I'm not a fan of ideologies. I think they're unbelievably dangerous. And I don't really care whether they're on the left or the right. So to be a feminist or a trans activist or to adopt that group-fostered view of the world, I think is generally a mistake. And I don't think it does people any good. Not usually. And it also allows them to adopt, and this is something else that's gone very wrong with our political discourse, is that it allows people to adopt an unearned sense of moral superiority and also of omniscient knowledge, because an ideology offers you that. And there's just nothing in that's helpful.
So what you have
fragments people.
But then what you have isn't an ideology, or
no, it's not an ideology. And
isn't a strong collection of ideas in a sense always an ideology?
No, it's not. It's not. And it's a mistake to think that way, because all that means is that the way that you construe the world is a battleground between different ideologies. And if an ideology is only that which serves a power elite, let's say, which is part of the postmodern neo-Marxist construal, then all it ever is a battle of opinions. And there's nothing underneath that. And it's all power. And that's just not an appropriate way of looking at the world. First of all, there's lots of forces at play that aren't mere power. Competence is one of them, assuming that there are some things that are worthwhile doing. And then with regards to ideology, I wrote a book about that. The first book I wrote is called Maps of Meaning. And it's a description of the relationship between archetypal or mythological thinking, proper religious thinking, I would say, and the parasitical structures that emerge from that, which are basically ideologies. And they can be technically differentiated.
What do you make of liberalism?
I would consider myself a classic liberal.
You would consider yourself a classic liberal?
Yes, although...
Which is also has beliefs attached, right? It comes out of a tradition of evolution of beliefs, but there is also a radical liberalism, isn't there, which feeds into feminism, which believes that progress is a better thing than lack of progress. I mean, the Economist is founded on those basics, and that people can argue about what they want to take or leave. But do you include then liberalism as one of the isms that you would say is in crisis at the moment, or has got itself into a mess?
Well, it depends to some degree, as you pointed out, on how you define liberalism. But one of the things that I like about the classic liberal take on the world, to which I think we owe Britain a great debt of gratitude for developing, perhaps more particularly than any other country, is that the individual is to be regarded as the sovereign entity in the political understanding. But that's not really a political claim. It's a claim that underlies politics. It's actually a theological claim. It's derived from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And because in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the suffering individual is the sovereign entity. And we established a political system based on that metaphysical axiom. And so I would say that to the degree that liberalism acts out the idea of the sovereignty of the individual, it's not an ism, it's not a political stance. It's far deeper than that, what it's predicated on. And the idea of the sovereignty of the individual is an idea that emerged with great difficulty over tens of thousands of years, or longer than that. It has an immense developmental history that radically predates, let's say, the Enlightenment or any articulated political beliefs. It's far deeper notion than anything that can be encapsulated politically.
But if we look at some of the great classic liberals of the 19th century, and we look back to Mill, for example, you have individual liberty very strongly in there from Locke onwards, a sort of the sense of sovereignty, and no one from the monarch down has the right to unfair sovereignty over another man or woman. But you also have a strongly kind of progressive sense that develops as liberalism develops, and takes you towards women's franchise, towards, actually in Mill's case, a fairly out there feminism. If J.S. Mill was sitting here instead of me, would you be seeing eye to eye on whether that was a good idea?
Well, again, I think it depends on what you mean by feminism. I mean, the idea that it would be a good thing for the world to arrange itself so that the talents of women were as available to use by the collective, let's say, by the group or by society as the talents of men, then obviously that's all for the good. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever, because talent's in short supply, and it's a foolish society that wastes it no matter where it manifests itself. Racial divisions or ethnic divisions or any of that, equality of opportunity. I can't see how you can be a sensible person and not
do
possess...
Do you think do women have opportunity? Do women have equality of opportunity then broadly across Western societies?
Compared to what?
Compared to not having equality of opportunity.
Well, compared to 100 years ago, yes. Compared to 50 years ago, yes. Compared to most places in the world throughout history, yes. Compared to a hypothetical ideal, no. But I'm very, very leery. Would that hypothetical
ideal be a good ideal or a bad ideal?
Well, it depends on how you define equality. If you define it as equality of outcome, then it's a catastrophic ideal. See, this is something too. One of the things I've been struggling with recently is the idea of boundaries, let's say. We know absolutely, and this is relevant to your questions on progressivism, we know that the left can go too far, and we know that the right can go too far. I mean, I would say that's the abject lesson of the 20th century. Both can go too far. And we kind of know when the right goes too far. We probably think the right goes too far, if you had to boil it down to one thing, when people start making claims of racial or ethnic superiority. That seems to be the marker. But we don't know when the left goes too far. And the left, to be frank about it, isn't very careful about differentiating itself into those who are pursuing a reasonable progressive agenda and those who have seriously gone too far. And I would say that when people push an equality of outcome agenda, they've gone too far. Even though it's not as blatantly horrifying, let's say, as claims of ethnic or racial superiority, the consequences of playing that idea out in the world are seriously not good.
But surely they are, they're two kind of doorstops at the far ends of the arguments. I mean, very few people, I think, on the left, and there would be some who would advocate for absolute equality of outcome and everything it would take to achieve
that. It's not so clear to me
Similarly,
that that's a minority view.
There may be lots of things that are wrong, both on the left and on the right, that don't involve the right being overtly racist and the left wanting absolute equality of outcome. It's a space, surely, in the middle that matters, and that's why I suppose people feel that sometimes your argument is almost sort of, it's driving towards picking the fight rather than liberalism would, I suppose, encourage you to take the best, and we can have the argument about what's the best and what's the worst of everything that's in between.
No,
What's wrong with that?
I think that the left poses a far greater danger than your analysis suggests. I certainly see this in the universities. And the drum is being beat very, very hard, perhaps not so much here, but in North America, for equality of opportunity or equality of outcome under the rubric of equity. And equity is essentially a doctrine that fosters the notion that equality of outcome is not only desirable, but should be pursued as an object or as an explicit aspect of public policy. The idea being that if there isn't equivalent representation of all possible groups at all possible levels of all possible hierarchies, that indicates a tyrannical prejudice that needs to be rooted out. And that's having an absolutely pernicious effect on institutions, especially educational institutions in North America. It's an increasingly widespread view, and I think it poses far more danger than you think.
Is it possible that views become more attractive when something is dissatisfied and when aspirations have not been met, which are reasonable aspirations to have, and you can then say that the answers are wrong or that they distort.
Sometimes.
But so I suppose I'm trying to say, if this is such a popular view, to cite your example on campuses in North America, it may be that there's something out there that existing society has not satisfied.
What hasn't satisfied the ever-present human tendency towards envy and resentment, that's for sure.
So that's all that's driving it?
Not all, but it's a tremendous amount of what's driving it. And an absolute lack of gratitude for what we've managed to accomplish and what we have in front of us. I mean,
unfairness, does that figure?
Well, unfairness is a very ill-defined term. I mean, it's not so obvious either. It's not so obvious what's fair. So, for example, I got embroiled in a dispute the last time I was in the UK about the issue of the gender pay gap. And, from a social science perspective, the idea of the gender pay gap is it's so poorly formulated that it's almost staggering to me that people can even conceptualize it in this manner. It's not a univariate problem. It's a multivariate problem. Men and women don't make the same amount of money. So we can break it down and
then we can go through the
not only could we have to.
Good.
And we can't assume that just because in all situations women don't make as much money as men, although there are some situations in which the reverse is true, by the way, that the reason for that is prejudice and oppression. There's many reasons for it.